Welcome to today's episode of Lead with Curiosity, and today I'm joined by Dave Lewis, founder of a business called the Recademy, and the Recademy specialises in working with recruiters, and Dave talks about the fact that he helps recruiters build businesses for people that they don't need to carry, and I'm really looking forward to tapping into his knowledge about recruitment, about what we should be doing as hiring managers and business owners, but I'm also curious to learn a little bit more about what it's like to set up your own business. So lots to get into. Enjoy the episode. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. Delighted to welcome you. So Dave Lewis, founder of the Recademy. Tell us a little bit about the Recademy, first of all.
Okay, well, the Recademy is a development business essentially, but we specialise in working with recruitment professionals. And rather than set something up which was purely driven by classroom training, I've been doing the job long enough to recognise that while that's valuable, it's not always enough. So I wanted to find enough space to ensure there was one-to-one coaching and where appropriate, on the desk implementation. So to try and combine a kind of full holistic development service, if you will, for recruitment professionals. That's the driver behind it.
And it's recruitment professionals specifically that you work with?
And specifically agency professionals. So the three kind of strands I tend to get called in to help with are with recruiters who are struggling with fill rates. They might be taking on a good number of jobs but are not filling enough of them, so we try and improve fill rates. Particularly the last couple of years, I'm working with a lot of firms and a lot of individuals where there's a lack of business development skill, but really in many cases it's business development reluctance. It's a part of the job which forever people have tended not to gravitate towards and have tried to avoid as best as possible. So we do a lot of work around that. And also, like yourself, I work with leaders and managers in the recruitment space at all levels, but primarily with operators who are maybe stepping into their first genuine people management roles and are essentially having to combine two roles. They're expected to operate at the same level as they always have done, but by way of a reward for being good at that, they're given 3 or 4 weirdos to manage, and it's just expected that from day one they will have a skill set to be able to do both of those distinct elements of the jobs really competently.
Okay. So I know, obviously, from the background point of view, it's a different route. I'd love to ask you about it because you were 20 years as a director for a very successful business doing something similar. Tell us a little bit about that and what prompted you to then set up on your own.
Yeah, okay. So I was with a business called Enabling Change for 20 years, not initially as a director, but subsequently as a director. And I initially joined them after leaving Reed in a training capacity. So as a training manager, I think my title was, which was essentially delivery, development, design of training programs, but then progressed, I suppose, a small business to be a director, part owner of that business, and part owned it with 2 other people who are a married couple, and were at a slightly more, and still are at a slightly more advanced stage of life than I am. So there was always going to come a kind of a natural stop point, I suppose, to that business, and there was always going to be a necessity essentially for me to do something after that business. So it was a crossroads that was kind of well signposted for years and years. You essentially find yourself in a position where I suppose your kind of flat choice is, do I do something on my own or do I get a proper job? And I would, in 10 years' time in particular, had I not set up on my own, I think I'd have regretted that. And if the Recademy, fingers crossed, it pans out well and we've started well and it's looking good. But if it didn't pan out, I could look back on that in 10 years and think, well, at least you gave it a go. If I'd not given it a go, that would have really frustrated me.
It's really interesting you say that. We had a conversation with Hugo from the podcast collection on an earlier episode, and he said exactly the same thing. He didn't want to be in that position where he hadn't given it a go.
Yeah.
But still a brave decision to make, to set up on your own, having had, albeit a small business, but being a decision maker within that.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure I see it as brave. It's necessity. And when you're in that situation, you've kind of got limited choices, but you've got kids, and you've got a mortgage to pay. You've got to do something. So it felt more inevitable than a brave choice. And like I say, it'd been signposted for a long time. You know, I ran or was a director at Enabling Change with 2 other people. There was always going to be a point where we kind of shook hands and said, well, we're going to go slightly different ways. So it feels like it's, although it's a new business, it feels like it's been a long time coming. And it's also, I also think it's one of those things where, because the Recademy is in a very similar field and offering similar services to what we've always done, you have that spotlight effect, right? Where you think, this is going to dazzle everyone, the new thing, it's amazing because it's occupying your thoughts. And for some of my current client base, I'm not sure they'll have noticed the difference that much. So these things that weigh heavily on you,
so it's a continuation.
It's a continuation. It's a new business, but I've spoken to a few people about it being a relatively low risk business, in that it's a business where I'm essentially doing what I've done for the last 25 years. And I'm currently doing it with a lot of the companies that I've worked with over the last 5-10 years. So there's risk whenever you set up a business, right? But in my case, it's a limited risk, and it's perhaps a more calculated risk than thinking I'm going to quit a well-paid job and do something entirely different and hope for the best.
Okay.
That'd be
So
brave.
at the time of recording this, the Recademy is 5 months old, I believe.
Yeah, well, we're 5 months old. We launched mid-February, so or properly launched mid-February. So yeah, we're 3-4 months into kind of trading and standing on our own feet, I guess.
Okay, so relatively short amount of time, although I have to say you've come a long way in that time. I'm delighted to hear you say you've started well. I'm not surprised by that, but I'm delighted to hear it. Any reflecting back lessons learned? I'm thinking for anyone listening that's thinking of setting up their own business, any kind of immediate challenges or lessons learned in setting up a new startup?
I suppose 2 things that spring to mind. Firstly, and because we're both from that recruitment background, there's that old recruitment line that, running your own desk is a lot like running a business. And then when you start running a business and setting up a business, you realize that that's complete nonsense. And that when you're running a business, there's a lot of stuff which is I find deeply boring, not very glamorous, hugely unsexy. And so like the invoicing and the getting your payment systems set up and invoicing systems and admin and getting VAT registered, and the kind of the admin load and the amount of time you're going to spend doing stuff which is not the day job, not the training in my case, not the delivery, not the helping consultants. I think I underestimated, and I think you've got to be prepared to do quite a lot of that. I also think that, as with most, or likely most business owners who are planning it for some time, when you're in that planning phase before execution, you also dwell on loads and loads of things and loads of facets and factors of the business, which ultimately are probably not that important.
Okay.
At best, they're window dressing.
Yeah.
So everyone will have been there, I think, setting up a business, sweating for months about things like the logo and the company name and, what are you going to be a .co.uk or a .com and that kind of thing. And it's not to say that they're a complete irrelevance, but the danger is that those distractions take your eye off the ball of the stuff that's really important, your product and your market and your route to market and your outreach and your sales and those kind of things. And so, yeah, to go into it your eyes open as to the amount of additional work that is going to be involved in running a business and just setting one up is arduous. And then secondly, I've been working with small and mid-sized business owners for the last 20 years. And I'm consistently, when I'm coaching them and just chatting to them informally, consistently talking to owners who are running brilliant businesses, but they often don't look like they're enjoying it much because they're thinking about the next challenge and the next obstacle and how we push on and how we grow from here. And a lot of my advice to those people over the years has been, listen, great that you're thinking about that, but do find some time to give yourself a pat on the back, go for a curry with the other directors, enjoy it. Otherwise, what's the point? And then you find yourself doing it yourself. And of course, you make exactly the same mistake. So yeah, the last 3-4 months has been great. And if you'd have offered me this in January or February, say this is where you'd be, I'd absolutely bite your hand off. But my mindset is all about the deal that we were hoping to get closed this week and now it's going to drag on to next week, and how do we get that over the line, and if we hit this target, what is the stretch one, and how do we push on? And so I think there's, and I'm not there yet, I'm good at telling other people to find it, but I've got to get better at finding that balance between
I couldn't agree more.
pushing on and stretching, but also celebrating, you know, what you've achieved.
Yeah, I'm just celebrating 21 years and I'm still trying to work out how to do that. So I can relate to it. And we were obviously chatting earlier before we sat down about exactly that. And you made a really good point about almost seeing a 12-month cycle come to fruition and understanding, are there going to be natural peaks? We talked about August and July, summer holidays as an example. But pleased to hear you also saying you've taken some time off in August. And I think that's also important, right? Is to factor in and block in that time, not just let it happen by accident because it's gone quiet.
Yeah, I think although getting through those first 12 months, I don't think it's necessarily going to teach me a huge amount that I'm not expecting, or very happily tell you if I'm wrong. But it'd be nice to get that 12 months under my belt, partially because of the seasonality, although I think in our world that's reasonably predictable, right? Because August, people are on holiday, it's hard to book in training. Similarly in December, and I can either push back and resist that and throw everything at it in those months, or I think, well, chill out, take holiday, focus on the months that are going to be better. But it's almost those kind of little micro rhythms through the year of we're recording this in May, where you've got the bank holidays, and of course in setting up a business you know there's going to be a couple of days off, but it's only a couple of days off, right? But then you realise that actually a lot of the people you want to talk to probably had the Friday off beforehand, and they don't fancy coming on the Tuesday, and now might as well take the week, right? And so it's the obvious lulls, but it's that momentum around marketing and sales and just having conversations with people that I feel will be easier to track with that full year under the belt, and to go into next year feeling a little bit more ready.
Yeah.
But then something else mad will happen, and it'll...
Of course it will.
Yeah.
But that's the fun of it, right?
Yeah.
I would really like to tap into your recruitment knowledge. As you alluded to earlier, we're both from the recruitment industry, so I know you have a rich history in recruitment. So for people listening, particularly thinking of business owners that are thinking of hiring, or maybe a new manager about to make their first hiring decision, before we reach for a CV or anything like that, are there any questions that you think people should be thinking about or considering before they push that button?
Yes, is the short answer. The slightly lengthier answer, there are so many questions, and I suppose the danger of there being so many is it becomes overwhelmed for a manager who, going back to what I mentioned earlier on about managers in recruitment, who are managers, but they're often operators and they're busy people, and now they've been thrown this recruitment thing to do, and you run the risk of kind of treating it as an admin exercise. So without wishing to overwhelm, 3 core questions I think it's important that a hiring manager focuses on before they think about writing an ad, calling a recruiter, whatever else. And the first one really simply is to get clarity on what, as in what exactly is it that I am hiring for. Now, you might be at a business where you've got a HR team and they've put together a job spec or a job description, which might be of some value. But what I really mean in defining what you're hiring for, in your own words, what do you want this person to be doing on a day in, day out basis? Can you describe a typical working week? What does success look like after 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? How will it be measured? And to think of it almost in a more conversational style than a job spec, of exactly what it is you are going to be hiring for, because that what is probably best seen as a product. And you are, whether you use a recruiter, whether you do it yourself, you're going to take that job to market to try and attract people to it. So the what is really all about defining that product with total clarity. Okay, and if you have got a job spec or a job description internally, use it as a start point, but tear it apart, interrogate it, challenge it. Is everything essential? Is the money right? Really pull that apart. But fundamentally, what do you want them doing on a day in, day out basis? Once you've established that, second question is who, as in who do we want to come in and do this job? Now, at a base level, you're probably thinking about things like what level of experience is the candidate going to need, what skills and what qualifications, and absolutely do that, but keep scratching beneath the surface. Do we want people who've worked at certain organisations or are working there right now? Do we want to avoid people with certain backgrounds? Look to your current team. What is it about the people who are working out that you can learn from and replicate? Are there any hires you regret? Any people you've taken on and wish you hadn't? And what can we learn from that to really again, try and get better focus on precisely who it is we want to sell this product of the job to. And then thirdly, and finally, and trying to keep it succinct, third key question is the one that I think gets overlooked the most, and it's arguably the most critical one, which is why, as in, why the hell is the candidate who you want to hire going to take this job? Because in a lot of professional hiring, the person that they're looking for, the ideal candidate, if you like, they're very likely, they're very often doing a similar job for a similar business, being paid a similar amount with similar expectations. So fundamentally, why would somebody up and leave a job at your biggest competitor to come and take the job with you? And really think about that at the level of somebody who's in a job, maybe happy where they are, may or may not be actively seeking a move. What is it about this role that is going to pull in the right person? And as a head start, competitive salary is not it. Nobody is in a job and happy where they are and reading a job ad thinking, competitive salary, I'm applying, get me out of here. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
What is it that you've got to sell? And be honest, boil it down. Where do you stand out? What do the people who work there love about it? And I think you can take some reassurance with taking jobs to the market in a sense, in that although you might want to look at it as a product and something we've got to promote to the right people, you don't need hundreds of people to buy. You're only trying to sell it ultimately to that one right person. So what is it about this role that this person is going to be attracted to? What is it that's going to give them the impetus to apply, put their names in the hat? And I think in answering that question, the most important thing is to be brutally honest about it. What is it that sets us apart? Why would somebody genuinely join us? What have we got to offer?
There's some real gold in there. And I think that being brutally honest, I think sometimes you have to confront some difficult questions. So, for example, if the previous 3 role holders haven't lasted more than 8 months, there's possibly a reason behind that, right?
100%. And put yourself in the shoes of a potential job seeker. If they're reading an ad or they're being approached by a recruiter, it's quite a sophisticated audience in many respects. And if you're looking to hire decent people, they'll know guff when they read it. And if the job ad is paying the competitive salary and we're looking for a dynamic, competitive team player who's happy working autonomous, it just reads the same as everything else. So, perhaps a decent start point is to look at similar roles on Indeed or Reed or something like that. Read those job ads and then think, I'm not going to make the same mistakes as have been made, because the mistakes are...
Well, I'm just listening to the adjectives you rattled off there, and I think we've all seen them hundreds of times.
And over 20, 30 years, right?
Right.
So it's avoiding the cliche as much as anything else is of value.
Okay. So the recruitment industry, as you and I both know, it gets a bit of a bad rep. And I think, let's be clear, there are some, like in any industry, there's some real cowboys out there, but there are some real quality people, and people like you are obviously working to make the industry better. If I've never worked with a recruiter before, I'm wary of working with a recruiter, how do I go about making that work for me? Because it's all well and good blaming the recruiter, but as a hiring manager or a business owner, what should I be thinking about or doing to make that relationship work well?
Yeah, okay. As a start point, be prepared to invest some time, effort, and energy if you're going to work with a recruiter in selecting somebody who is going to represent you properly in the market. Because if you, as you say, that any market, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? But I think with any good professional, whether it's an accountant or a lawyer or a financial advisor, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of having a conversation with somebody and you're 2 or 3 minutes in and you've got a problem and you're talking to a lawyer, accountant, advisor, whatever else. But within 2-3 minutes, you just think, God, yeah, they get it. Take my money. I just trust. And they breed confidence in what they're about. I think good recruiters will do that. I think bad recruiters will do exactly the opposite. But as a hiring manager, I think it's worthwhile you having some insight into the kind of the commercial pressures that the recruiter is under and that sometimes the hiring manager has a part in creating. And I suppose as a key example of what I mean by that, for a lot of hiring managers, they might have a role and they'll think, okay, I'll hedge my bets. We'll cover the whole market. I'm going to give this vacancy out to 5 or 6 recruiters because I'm only going to pay them upon success. So, I'll do that for best result, which can work. And it works well with volume roles and urgent hires, all that kind of stuff. But you also create a dynamic for that recruiter where they know they're directly competing with 5 or 6 other recruitment companies or individual recruiters. And they also know in most cases that only one of them is going to get paid. So what you're really doing is creating a commercial dynamic which is encouraging the recruiter to work as quickly as possible. Now, sometimes that will be appropriate. Urgent need, multiple hires, need 20 people next week, whatever else. But if you're encouraging a recruiter to work quickly, you're discouraging them from doing a high quality search. You're discouraging them to spend time with prospective candidates to really get to know them. And what you'll likely create is a dynamic where they're all just emailing CVs of people at you as quickly as possible to kind of take personal ownership of them. So you're creating a dynamic based on speed, and you're probably going to, if you work with multiple recruiters, think you've got some control over things like the fee you pay. You might pay cheaper, you might drive pace, but it'll likely have an impact on quality. If it is a good level professional hire that you are recruiting for, it might be worth really vetting the recruiters and thinking about working with a recruiter on either an exclusive basis where you work with them and no other recruiters, or even a retained basis where you pay them a portion of the fee up front. Because in either of those dynamics, what you're basically doing is giving that recruiter more time to go to the market. Their business risk is reduced. They know that if they get you the right person, they're going to get paid for their work. You've got time to sit down with them and to determine how you want your company or your brand to be properly represented and come up with a strategic sell for that role. So you're essentially giving the recruiter a better chance of doing their job well, but ultimately you're giving yourself a better chance of getting the right candidates. Now, that's not to say there's a better or worse way of working, but if you've got an insight as to the kind of commercial pressures that the recruiter is likely under and how some of those commercial dynamics are created by the way in which the hiring manager or the hiring company chooses to work with them, it should give you a little bit of control over the obstacles that you create or minimize in that process.
I think you've just given me a perfect business case as to why those 3 questions that you referred earlier are really important, because without that grounding, you're going in and giving limited information. And then, as you say, it just becomes a race.
Right. And just going back to that dynamic, the line manager and the recruiter, there's lots of finger pointing both ways, right? But if as a hiring manager, you've contacted a recruiter and you've said, yeah, we need somebody to start at the end of the month, I'll email you the job spec, good luck, see you later. Are you really putting in the time, effort and energy to help them to help you do a great job and get a great person?
And you're spot on. It's a two-way street. So with the balance of power, parity, I guess, in terms of the things that hiring managers do that will drive recruiters mad distraction. I'm thinking, for example, of not responding to feedback from interviews. Are there things like that as a hiring manager or a business owner we should be thinking about?
I think so. But again, rather than say, the hiring manager's at fault or the recruiter's at fault, because it ends up a bit sort of finger pointy, I wonder if there's not a value in trying to create a dynamic where there's clear expectations both ways in terms of what's going to happen. And you try and build a dynamic, if you're going to work with a recruiter, where there's genuine shared responsibility, where I'm going to commit as a hiring manager to doing this bit and I need you to commit to doing this bit. And that could be as simple and often only needs to be as simple as a commitment on the amount of time you're going to put into the process. And you are quite right in mentioning things like timelines. One of the biggest gripes you hear from recruiters is, I didn't get feedback after an interview, or I didn't get feedback after submitting a candidate. But I'd want to reframe it a bit from a hiring manager's perspective and from a recruiter's perspective, because if a hiring manager gets frustrated with the recruiter because, oh God, they're whinging and they're chasing me and all that kind of stuff, I mean, forget the recruiter, put yourself in the candidate's position, right? Because if you're a candidate working at a rival firm and you've maybe had your head turned by a recruiter about this opportunity with your business, and you've gone to interview and you're keen on the job, and then you're waiting a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days for feedback, I think that candidate will likely start to think they can't be that interested. And that might ultimately lead to them thinking, well, if they're not that interested, I'll stay where I am or I'll take other options. So rather than it being finger pointy, it's self-harm. If there are clear expectations and clear commitment on timelines in terms of, when the recruiter is going to get back to you, are you going to book in weekly steering calls so they can give you updates, even if the update is there's not much of an update. Spoke to 5 people, they're not right, here's why. But you're also committing to say, okay, If you send me profiles, I will get back with a response in 24 hours.
Yeah.
If we run an interview, I will immediately give you feedback, because that will mean as a recruiter that if you liked my candidate, I can keep them warm and I can keep them interested. And if you don't like them, I can go back to them and I can give them that feedback. But either way, it's fairer to the candidate, and it's probably helping you and your brand reputation in the market. So rather than seeing it as helping the recruiter, see it, do it for self-interest, right? You're helping yourself to get better
hear
people.
so many stories of, it drives me mad, candidates through redundancy, whatever reason it might be, but looking for work, going through all the effort and then not even having the common decency or courtesy to have a reply. I think from a brand point of view, it's appalling.
Oh, of course. And it's so commonly levelled at recruiters.
Yeah.
And this is not a defence, but I think it's when an agency recruiter is maybe talking to 20, 30, 40, 50 candidates a week, a couple hundred a month in some cases. They won't all talk to that volume, but some will. I'm not condoning, but I can understand there where you almost lose sight of the fact that every one of the people you're talking to is on the verge of making a life-changing decision, right? Shifting career, moving job. It's hard to avoid that complacency. If you're a hiring manager and you're only hiring once every few months and seeing 3 or 4 people, there's no excuse for it, right?
Completely agree.
Give them the feedback, let them know where they stand.
Yeah.
You know, if you, it's golden rule stuff, right? Treat others you'd like to be treated.
Yeah.
And I think honesty goes a long way. Promptness of feedback goes a long way, from recruiters, from hiring managers, from candidates, right the way through that.
I think we're sadly in a time now where if people do get the feedback, it's seen as a differentiator. For me, it's a common courtesy.
100%. 100%.
Just going to start to wrap the conversation up. Thank you for all your insights. Genuinely delighted that you've gone down the route you have, and I have no doubt that the Recademy is going to be a roaring success.
Thank you.
How do people get hold of you if they want to find out more about the Recademy and what you do?
Well, LinkedIn is a good starting place. You'll find me, Dave Lewis, there. Recademy.com is the website. I'm fairly visible on LinkedIn if you do a cursory search for Dave Lewis's or Recademy, and I'm sure you'd find me there.
Yeah, and we'll put the details in the show notes as well. One last question from me. As you know, the title of the pod is Lead with Curiosity. This is a question we ask all of our guests. What are you curious about learning or exploring next?
I'll give you the stock answer I'll give you 2 answers.
Go
right?
on,
So the first
you.
answer is like the stock answer, I suppose, but it's genuine. Is where we're all going with AI, right? And it's genuine curiosity, because there are some days where I think this is a massive technical revolution, and I can get sucked into the white collar jobs are going to be a thing of the past. We'll all be living on universal basic income, and AI and the robots are taking over. And I can get on board with that. But I can also get on board with the idea that we might be 5 years down the road and kind of looking back on it and looking at GPT in the same way as we might look back on MySpace or Friends Reunited, if you're old enough, that it was like some kind of passing fad, and that a lot of the AI is here to stay, but it's being kind of integrated into more commonly used tech. I suppose, however it pans out, the bit I'm really curious about is how the human fits into that, and whether it places a greater price, a greater value on human interaction and having a chat to people and going to events and conferences and going for a beer in a recruitment world with a candidate who's thinking about taking a counter offer, or meeting up with a client for lunch to talk about their hiring plans, because I suspect there'll still be a requirement for that. I've still got family members who won't use cash points. You might have the tech, you don't always have the adoption.
Yeah.
And the second bit is a much more self-interested one. I'm curious about the first 12 months of my business and where we're sitting in this, May of next year, and certainly at the tail end of my first kind of financial year. And fingers crossed, we're not in a bad place unless AI takes over.
Well, let's get you back in 12 months and we'll find out.
Good job.
Where you're at. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thanks
for your
very
time,
much.
Dave.
Cheers, Anthony.
Cheers. So fascinating conversation with Dave. I'm really grateful to him for his time. I think there were some real nuggets in there, particularly the 3 questions that we should be asking ourselves before we recruit, rather than just jumping straight in and reaching for the job description that may or may not have been in the cupboard before, but also just some real partnership, I guess, with recruiters, and making sure that it's not just a one side or the other. It's very much a joint thing. So lots to get into there, lots of gold. We've put some of Dave's contact details in the notes. As always, thank you so much for listening or watching. And if you like more content, then press the follow button, as many of you have already done so.